Hey, everybody. Today on the AgentXcel podcast, we have our guest back again, Brittini Bowers. What's up, Britt?
Hi, how's it going? Happy to be back.
Hey, so yeah, last show went well. We talked about some really cool things, and I thought, hey, let's have you back on. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about a few other topics that we know a little bit about.
Sounds good.
So I wanted to bring you on so we could just talk about and like kind of like collaborate with each other on just like our investing journey. I think over the last few years, we've had so many people, like I've had so many past clients reach out to me and they're like, hey, I want to invest in properties. I've seen your like journey on Facebook or whatever, or however they've heard it, and they want to know more about it. So I thought, hey, let's do a podcast so the world could hear about the investing journey that we went through. And also, I guess just as a form of when people ask me about our investing journey, not only could I tell them, but I could like say like, hey, go listen to this podcast and you could hear all about it in detail.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So let's go over that. So when did we buy our first investment property? Do you remember?
I can't recall the year. I mean, obviously I know the exact property, but I can't recall the year that we started. I want to say you were in your late 20s.
Yeah,
So
that's
if we
interesting
think
because
back,
I could think it's probably like, man, I think it's like, I feel like it was like 8 years ago and I'm 38. But I know like I can remember like being probably like 28 when we bought our first property. So it's interesting how time flies. Like I'm 38
yeah,
now and I feel like I want to say it's 7 or 8 years, but it had to be longer than that. So let's just go
yeah,
back to that time because I think like that's really what I want to capture in this podcast is let's start off from like the reason I think everybody hears about like rental properties and they're like, okay, that's cool, but like why did we buy the rental properties? And so like I guess I could explain that a little bit more. And I remember you and we had a really nice high rise at like 24th Street in Camelback, like a super swanky place, like 900 square foot. And it was like a luxury condo and it was super cool. I think we were paying like $1,600 a month.
hmm I
And
remember that. The place was
yeah,
great.
it's I remember renting that place. It was super cool. Pool on the roof, like the 20th floor overlooking downtown. You could see like the Diamondback Stadium and just all of downtown. And I think we were paying, like I said, $1,500 a month. And
For a one bedroom, like 700 square feet, it was tiny. Actually, I
yeah,
don't even think it was 700 square feet. I think it was way less than that.
no, I think it was like 680 square feet. It was like one
Yeah.
bedroom, one bath, kitchen, little living room. But I think the coolest part of it is that it had that living room with the glass wall, like the whole entire wall was glass, and it was on
Yeah.
the eighth floor, and it overlooked the east side of Phoenix, and you just looked over like Biltmore, and it was super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being on the MLS one day, and I was looking for clients, and I don't even remember like this specific client or exactly what was happening, but I remember being on the MLS and I saw this property, and it was like $115,000. It was a condo and it was for sale. And it was if you're familiar with 24th Street and Camelback, that's a nice neighborhood. And this was like 1.5 miles down the road. And I wish it was east and not west, but it is what it is. So I remember seeing that property. It was like $115,000. And we went and took a look at it. And like the reason why I want to explain this portion of our investing journey is like like I said, we were living in a really cool spot, but yet we were renting. It was $1,500 a month at the time. That was actually pretty expensive, I would say. That was probably,
That was so expensive.
yeah, it was 8 or 9 years ago. So that was actually pretty expensive. And when I looked at this condo, I was like, okay, this is like, it was 790 square foot. I remember that specifically. So the place
hmm
we were looking at, I was like, it's 115,000. I was like, our mortgage payment's going to be like $550 a month. So we're not going to pay $1,500 for rent anymore.
I
And
know. I think our mortgage was like 500, like besides the HOA that we had to pay. But we were thinking about it. We're like, oh my gosh, like this is like less than half the price, even with the HOA.
I know, isn't that crazy? Like how simple life was at that time with just like
hmm
expenses. And so yeah, it was like 550 for the mortgage payment. I think the HOA was like 150 a month, but still like you were almost all in for like 650, 700. And that was the day that we drew a clear line in the sand. And I think we both did it, whether we talked about it or not. I think we knew. I remember
hmm
when we moved into that place, like it wasn't like there was nothing wrong with it, but it was nowhere near the level of luxury that we were living in.
hmm
And that was kind of like I said, the line in the sand where I was like, okay, we're renting this place and it looks super cool and it feels good and I like it and it's luxurious and we're going to go buy this place. And it's nothing like that. Like it wasn't luxurious. It was backed up to the 51 freeway. But that was the day where I was like, hey, we're going to own this. And not only are we going to drop our expenses like $1,000 a month, but we're going to own this. And like, there's something powerful about like I knew that wasn't the property that we were going to live in forever, but I moved into that place knowing that you and I, like, if I almost knew that like this was going to be our first rental property. So I was like, okay, we're going to buy this property and we're just going to live here. Right. We're going to have a much cheaper expenses than we were renting.
But I
And
do
we're
have
going
to say, even though it wasn't as luxurious, like we loved that place. Like it was right near all the restaurants we wanted to be near. It was super cool. So even though like it didn't look cool though, if like you were our friends probably looking in, it looked like we took a big step down probably because it really looked, I feel like that place, it didn't feel like a condo. It felt like more like an apartment complex.
it did.
And it, so, you know, for us, like we loved it though. Cause we're like, man, one of our friends even, I think was like, wait, do you guys own this or you guys rent this? We're like, no, we just bought it. We own it. And they're like, are you sure you're not renting it? And we're like, we're sure. Like we own it. I think we told them like 5 times.
I remember that conversation specifically. I remember being in the pool at the complex when we had them over and they asked us like 3 times, like, do you own this? Cause I'm like, it felt more of like an apartment complex.
Totally.
And I think that's what they were confused about is it was considered condo. So we owned it, but yet like it looked like an apartment complex that most people would live in. So I think that's why they were asking several times, like, do you really own this? And we're like, yeah, we own it. Are you sure you own it? Like we're pretty sure. Like we like, yeah, we signed the loan documents and everything. But what's cool about that part is we knew right then, like I said, it was a line in the sand that we were kind of taking a step back with like the quality of life of what it looked like. Like we have to both admit it wasn't as nice as the place we were renting.
No.
But we knew like that was our little piece of ownership. And so we, you know, just full disclosure, like talking numbers, because I think that's the best way to go is we bought that place, I think for like 112, 115,000. I think we put $22,000 down to buy it. And cool. We lived there but like I said, going into that, we like, I knew like this was going to be a rental property in the future. And I think like that's a lot of investors, when you hear their stories of like how they've bought 10, 12, 30 properties, a lot of those first initial properties they bought were more like what I would call organic. You're not buying them as an investment property. Like you're actually living with them, knowing that like you're buying it. Like it might not be the coolest spot. You're buying it so you can get that primary loan on it, living there for a few years, let's say, and then you're going to end up renting it out.
Well, I just think of all the things that we were able to do now, like from going from that big, larger rental cool payment to, having a mortgage that's less than half of that. I mean, we were able to get married, like we paid for our wedding with that extra money. Like it actually, even before like we decided to do any more investments, like it did so much in our life, I think during that time that it like that house will forever be grateful for.
Yeah. How long did we live there? 4 years?
I don't think it was that long. I think it was 3 because I think we were in it maybe a year and a half before we got married and maybe a year and a half afterwards. So probably about 3 years.
Okay. Yeah. 3 years longer than I thought is probably the answer to that. So probably like 3 or 4 years we lived there. And then like, that's where, like I said, we kind of took a step back from our luxury rental that we were going into, knowing that would be a rental property. And then that was the day. So it was like 3-4 years later. I remember it was kind of, natural again. I was looking on the MLS and I was like, hey, I think it was Emma, our dog. And I remember like, we were like, hey, we kind of want a backyard because we were coming down from the 2nd floor and we'd went from the luxury condo being eighth floor up. And then we went over to the place we owned. That was the 2nd floor up, still hard to get Emma out every single day. You kind of had to make, appointments to get home and get her out and things like that. And I remember it's just like kind of like talking like, hey, like this would be pretty cool if like we had a backyard for her. And I think that's where the conversation started, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Our life revolves around Emma.
And I remember being like, hey, like let's go buy like a house with the backyard. And I was like, where's the coolest spot we could be within the vicinity of where we're at? And it was we ended up finding a property over in Desert Ridge. And I think that was like 312,000.
And it's funny when I think back to that, like I remember being so nervous because that was so much money for us. Like that 300,000, I was like, this is so expensive. Like, I can't believe we're going to do this. And I remember I'm more like less risky, obviously, but I was like, this is crazy. Like, I remember like being like, I cannot believe we're about to spend this money.
Yeah. And I can still we still have that picture. And I know you've saved it. You've showed it to me a few times over the years. I remember going to that property and I saw it. I was like, okay, it's like 312,000. It's in Desert Ridge, good neighborhood.
You actually saw it before you brought me.
Yeah, I did. I went and saw it. I actually think most of the things are like that. Like, so I went and saw it and I was like, I think this could work. It's 312,000. The payment's going to be, I think I was going to put I think it was like 20 or no, it was like 12,000 down. That was the crazier part. We'll talk about that later. But so I think it was like $12,000 down. The lender said the payment was going to be like $1,900. And I remember going there. I was like, okay, it's got a pool. It's upgraded. It had been on the market for like 2 months for $312,000. I was like, I think this could be our home. Like it was like 1,700 square foot. And I was like, I think this is it. And then I brought you over. And that's the picture. I remember when I brought you over, you took this picture of me standing like proudly by the pool. Yeah. And I still love that picture because that was probably how much, 7 years ago, 6 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just cool. Cause I still like I remember like when I see that photo, like even to this day, I was like, I can still like feel that feeling of like, oh, I'm so proud. Like, like I'm going to buy my family like this piece of land. And
yeah,
I think what was also interesting about that, like that's when I knew like, okay, if we buy this, like that's what I was running the numbers. I was like, okay, like our payment was like $550 on our condo that we were in. We had an HOA of like $150 or so. And then what did we rent that condo out for the initial first investors? Do you remember?
I want to say, well, the renters, you mean?
Yeah.
I think it was, I think it was like $950 or something like that.
All right. So that was it.
It really wasn't. Yeah. It really wasn't a lot the first time. And, I think it wasn't until like the second round when we upped it up.
Okay.
I feel like it may be 1,000. I can't recall.
Yeah. I think
I just remember freaking out. Like, how are we going to be landlords? Like, we've never been a landlord before. Like, what does that mean? So.
Yeah. And it's like, so, okay. Yeah. We were going to rent it out for like 1,000 and all in on that place. We were probably like 650-ish, 700. So we were going to make like $300 a month. So I looked at it from the standpoint of like, okay, we're going to go buy another place, $12,000 down. We had that, right? So it's like, we did not need to sell the place to get the equity from it. Like we didn't need the profits from that to buy our next place. The next place we needed 12,000 down to buy that house in Desert Ridge. I was like, the payment's going to be $1,900. We're good there. And we're going to make probably like $300 or $400 on the place we're renting. So like mathematically, I was like, okay, then really like we're only paying about $1,200, $1,300 for this place if we utilize the money we're profiting from the condo. That's kind of how I based our decision. But I remember, like you said, like it was, man, it's so weird when you reflect back how like that would be nothing right now. But yet it kind of shows you how like there's certain times in life where you make these like risk or these bold decisions and you've just got to place your bets on yourself. And it's like when it's going to work, but you're a little nervous, like that's usually the things that you need to do. But I really remember us being like, not cautious of it, but we were just like, whoa, like our first place was 112,000. Now we're buying a 312 property. Like, is this the right decision? And we did it.
Well, I do remember when you were trying to like console me, like, we're going to be fine. It's just, we're just going to find good renters. Like if we need to take a little while to find them, we'll do that. And I remember you saying that, like, I'm going to be picky about who we rent to. So we're not picky, or we're not, renting to someone who's going to leave us high and dry or totally destroy the place. So I do remember you saying like, we'll just take as long, like, well, if we need to eat like a mortgage payment, we will, like, in order to find the right renters. Yeah. And thankfully we did find them pretty quickly. So that was good.
And what's so weird about that place is we put $12,000 down to buy that house. I'm still like floored. I know I say this to you all the time, but like when I drive by that house still to this day, I'm like, not only like we rent it out now and we'll get there, but like not only like is it worth probably $400,000 more than we bought it for? And we probably
house.
Yeah. So it's like not only is it worth probably $400,000 more than we bought it for, we're cash flowing probably 500 or 600, if not more, on that property. Like I look at that from like a cash on cash or like a return. And I'm like, we're going to walk into that place one day when we're like 57 years old. And like, since the tenants have been paying for that property, most of this journey of us owning that property, like we're going to walk into that place one day. It's going to be free and clear. And we're going to say like all the money we ever put into this was $12,000. And not only did we only put $12,000 to buy this little piece of gold, but we made $8,000-$9,000 a year for 30 years. And as we keep owning that, it's going to go up. Like that's the power. I think the cool part is like, I knew when I bought that place, like I was placing my bet knowing that, things were going to go up in value. And just to think like, yeah, 12 G's came out of our pocket. We bought that place and we lived there. So that was our, we moved into that place. That was our primary for probably 4 years. And we rented out our condo. Like it was something that I think we had like 3 different rounds of tenants into that place while we were still in our Desert Ridge house. And we had, I think, with 3 people, I think it went up to like, eventually it went from $1,000 a month. Then we rented it out to the next people for 11. I think it got up to like 1,250 if I'm not mistaken. And so you think like there's,
it was more than that. I think it was more than that.
Yeah, it could have been more than that. But I think like what's cool about that side of it is that, the first initial numbers of what we were renting it out for, like over 3 and 4 years, it went up like 300 and 400.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that ever changing like in our lifetime with just, like how rates go up for rent. That's obviously the power of being a homeowner, not a tenant, is you lock in an interest rate and you have that forever.
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, over the years, we were able to raise that rent and get more and more. So our ROI and our profit on that kept going up over the years. And
Yeah, that, and we probably didn't price it accordingly for,
no,
I think we were just so nervous about having good tenants that we were like, okay, it's okay.
yeah.
We'll get a couple $100 just as long as we can find some good ones.
Yeah. So then that was like, okay, so now we were living in the Desert Ridge house. So we had one condo that we like rented, like it was a rental. And then we lived in the Desert Ridge house. Like we really, our first rental property was just an organic rental. Like that's usually like when, like I remember not that long ago, a guy at the bank, like a bank teller, we were talking about like, he's like, oh, you're in real estate. And we started talking about rentals. Like it was like a 47-second conversation. It's how like, it was a quick conversation, but so powerful. And he's like, oh, I want to own rental properties. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And my first question to that kid, because I just knew it, I could feel it. He's like, I want to own rental properties. And I was like, do you own a house? And he's like, no. And I'm like, well, why don't you own a house? He's like, well, I want to own rental properties. Like, how about we do this? Like, stop renting a place, buy one. And that's going to be probably your first rental property.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want people to understand that, like, just like you can actually go into this and say that, this isn't the coolest place to live. Like, I'm probably not going to like show this thing off on Instagram. And like, but I want people to like, be proud of home ownership, not like whether something has quartz countertops or like wood flooring, or it's all decked out with the open floor plan. Like, be okay with a 1987 home that needs remodeled. And like, but you're so stoked on like, I own this thing. And I'm hopeful that as we keep going on with generations, like people can just be proud of like, hey, I own this. Like, it might not be like the sexiest spot ever that I'm ever going to own. And it's not the end of my journey. Like I believe so much in home ownership. I'm so thankful I have this.
I agree. I think that has to be your, the main thing that's driving you through is like home ownership is important. And if you're going to wait and wait and wait till you get the perfect house, like you might not ever get the perfect house. Like I feel like your income isn't going to continue to, in a traditional job, right? It's not going to continue to increase with the prices of homes.
Yeah. And I always kind of
always be in a cycle.
I kind of joke with like younger people, like let's say people under 23, 24 that come to us that want to buy a house. And I always say like, hey, you remember the house when you were 18 and graduated high school and with your parents? You don't remember the house when you were 2. And they'll kind of laugh. They're like, yeah, that's true. And I'm like, yeah, like you're buying the house right now that your parents owned when you were 2. You're not buying the house that you like graduated high school from. Like they probably had 4 houses during that era of you being 2 to graduating high school. So like try to remember that, like that first one, which they won't, but I'm just trying to get them to understand like this isn't the end of your journey. There's a starting point for everybody. And so, yeah. So, okay. So we had the condo and then we lived in the Desert Ridge house. And then how did it go next?
So then we started, we bought a house in Surprise. It was actually a foreclosure that you had found.
A short sale.
Short sale. Sorry. So this was, obviously when those weren't really prevalent, you're like, I'm just going to throw an offer on. Like it could take months for us to hear. And then it actually wasn't. I think it was like 45 days. And then we're like, Britt, this is like a really good deal. Like we're getting a really good deal on this. We should do it. And I'm like, I don't know. We already have the one. It feels like it's snowballing. And you're like, yes, it's snowballing.
Yeah. So glad it's snowballing. This is great. Yeah. So it's interesting how like your little bit of like worry or maybe anxiety was like what I was actually going for. So it's like interesting how like you got to be on the same page. And I think we'll talk about that as we got more on how we did that. But yeah, I remember. So I was and it's so funny how like these first like 3 properties weren't even me really searching for properties. It was just me being on the MLS and seeing stuff. So like there's value in like being the realtor and seeing stuff. But yeah, I was on the MLS and I was like, whoa, this property is like 165,000 in Surprise. And at the time, like that was the going rate. People who hear this now are like, whoa, that was a deal. Like, no, like the value of that house at the time, I felt like it was probably around like,
it was like 190. I think.
Yeah. I was like, this should sell for probably like 190 to 200,000. And they had listed it for 165, I believe. And I saw it. I was like, why is this active? And it was like the last short sale ever. And we sold a lot of short sales. So I really know that I could feel that feeling. Because when we wrote that offer, I was like, I haven't did a short sale. I don't think in like over like a year or two. Like, how is this even being short sold? And yeah, you're right. Like I was just like, hey, let's write out an offer. Sometimes these take 3, 4, 9 months to figure out. Like, let's just throw out an offer. And yeah, you're right. Like they came back to us and they're like, I think it was 165 listed. I wrote like a 145 offer, something like a little ridiculous. They came back. Remember the realtor's like, hey, we're going to counter you. like 160 or something like that. I was like, dude, I'm in. But that was actually the first actual investment property per se, meaning from a loan
Right.
standpoint, how we purchased it.
I also think that was our first, like, anytime we had to do like kind of any sort of remodeling to something, which is, we've been pretty lucky where we haven't had to do really anything. But I remember this one, it had like this crazy gate in the hallway, like a 6-foot metal, like outdoor gate, right? And it's like blocking off the hallway from like the kitchen, the living room. And then all the walls of the hallway were just like tore up, like all the all the baseboards were tore up. And we're like, what kind of monsters do they keep back here? Like, it was pretty intense, but I mean, it wasn't crazy damage. Like, it wasn't extensive drywall. Like, it just had to be patched and like, fixed in a couple areas, and then the gate obviously taken down. And then there was like scratch marks, I think, on the back door. It needed a paint job, and then it really needed like a really good carpet cleaning. But that was really, I mean, besides a couple little maybe other handyman things here and there really wasn't too much that we had to fix. But I do remember, because again, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to cost a bunch of money. And you're like, no, it's not going to cost a bunch of money. Like, we're just going to get some quotes. And it actually it wasn't a big deal at all. But that was our first also one that we had to like put a little bit of money into before we rented it.
Yeah, I think we put like $5,000 or $6,000 in to get that actually like up to par. I think we like painted it. We had to get the drywall done. We had to get the baseboards done. But yeah, I was like, but I was looking at, I'm like, okay, like I feel like this is probably undervalued, 15,000. Like we're buying it, I felt like, for a good price. And then it was the first one though that we bought from like an investing standpoint. So like I said, the first property, I think we put like 20,000 down. The second property, we put like $12,000 down. That one's still a joke to this day. I'm still like super stoked on that decision. But those were homes we were living in. So it's like, you can actually put like a minimal down payment. Like we had decided at that point, we're like, hey, like we don't want to go from Desert Ridge to Surprise. Like we didn't want to move. So like we didn't want to like go get a different primary. So we're like, hey, this is going to be the first one that we actually have to put like 25% down. So I think it was like 35 to 40,000 that we had to put down, which is our first experiment of like, whoa, like you're forking out a little bit of money now to actually get this done. And so, yeah, but we closed on that one. And yeah, like, even like, what did we rent that one out initially? Like 1,400, I think it was 1,450.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, but that was the going rate. I feel like at that time. So
yeah. So that was 1,450. I think we rented that out for. Yeah, because that was that one guy who, yeah, I remember the guy who rented it. And then it was a year later he moved out. Then we rented it to Clemmy. And Clemmy rented that out for 1,500 and rented that out for like 4 years. And it was interesting because she just moved out probably like 4 months ago. And we just like, we're capitalists with heart.
Chris, I was like, you never raise the rent on that ever. Like, they're so sweet. They're just like a little old couple. And I love them so much.
Yeah. And so like, we're capitalists with heart. So like Britt was like, you can't raise the rent on them. And we could have. And how I know we could have is because they lived there for like 4 years and we kept it at 1,500. So I was glad we did that. Her like husband passed away like while living there and all this stuff. So like, we left it at 1,500. And when she moved out recently to move to like, she moved to another state like Maine, and she bought a house there to move closer to family. But when she moved out, we rented it. And I think we got $2,100. So like, I think that's another like super powerful story is like, we could have raised the rent on her over that 5 years. We didn't because we had a reason. That's fine. But like when she moved out, like we started renting it out for like $600 more a month. So like, you got to think from like times that by 12, like how much a year, like more we were making. And that's once again, like that's the power of home ownership, because like, the first person who started there was renting it for like $1,450. And then now we're at $2,100. And I would say like in another 4 and 5 years, it's probably going to be $2,400 and $2,700. Over time, it's just going to keep going up. But yet like our mortgage keeps staying the same. And it's once again why I'm like always urging people, like, you can't keep renting a place because you're contingent on the market rates. Where like when you buy a place, at least you're signing up for a note that you own and it can't change on you. Property taxes can change, the insurance can change, but like they can't change that note and that percentage that they're charging you for interest.
Yeah. And I think another important thing to note from that is like, we have several that we didn't raise rents on if they stayed long-term. Like I remember the two girls that rented our condo for a while, they were good tenants. If they were good tenants, we did not raise the rent on them. And we still to this day do that, because turnover is something that's really important to recognize as well. If you have good tenants, they don't ask for a lot, they take care of the place. I really think that's important that you kind of keep that into consideration, because we do have a couple, which we'll probably later talk about in Oklahoma, where the turnover, and it's like you turn over and then it's like, okay, this that you got to do. And that, I mean, that eats into your cost for the next rental. So I think that's important to note too, is, if you do have good renters, like it's not always about capitalizing on charging additional rent at that time.
So at what point, Bricks, I know we've talked about this a few times just to people and just telling our story. It's like, at what point did you get a little leery? Was it that Lumberg property when we were buying the, like, we had rented the condo, we lived in Desert Ridge, now we were buying the house in Surprise? Was that the first one where you got a little squirrely?
Probably, just because there's so many new things on that one. It was, the much larger down payment than we ever had before. And, I mean, that was a lot of money to give up. And it's not like we had a ton of money at that time. So I feel like that was a big risk that we were taking just for the long haul. And then also I think, just with like having to do a little bit of work to it and not sure, how it would rent out. I think that was just a little bit unnerving. And then I think the one though is the next one where I think I got like the most squirrely, just because the next one was also in Surprise. We kind of felt like we had a good grasp. I mean, obviously we work Surprise so much, like we do have a really good grasp on out there. But this one was one of our clients, and he needed to sell like pretty quickly, and the numbers worked out where, it worked out for us to buy it from him. So for that one again, I mean, because it wasn't too long after we bought the Lundberg property.
Yeah.
And so I felt like it was just like a lot, like back to back, but,
yes.
I mean, it worked out, but that kind of stuff made me really nervous.
Yeah. So I remember going to Roy's house, and I'd helped Roy buy this house in Surprise like 2 years before. I sat down, I know Roy well, and I sat down at his couch, and we're talking about selling the house. And I was like, hey, Roy, your house, he's like, I want to sell this like now, like quickly. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, like, I mean, like we can sell it quickly. And he's like, what do you think it's worth? I'm like, 215. And he's like, well, like, what's your like real estate commission is going to be? And I told him. And so he's like, okay, well, like, how fast can we get this done? And I just told, like, I remember telling him, I was like, hey, like if I did the numbers, like if I could get you to the same price, like if I put it on the market for 215 and I charge you a commission, and like, there's going to be a net to that. Like if I could just buy it for that net, would you sell it? And he's like, yeah, like that's totally cool. Like, I don't mind. I remember I was like, okay, well, let me go home and pencil that out and see if it works. So I remember going home and I was like, okay, it's going to be another, we like, now let's go back. Like we have the condo that we're renting out. We live in the Desert Ridge house. We have a Surprise house. That was our first true investment. And now I'm coming home like a year later and I'm penciling this out. And I remember doing the math, and I remember talking, I was like, hey, like we could buy this. And it was like $200,000 is basically what it was. And I was like, hey, like we can buy this. It's going to be again, like another 20-25%, probably another 35-40 G's. And like, here's the rents. Like, are you cool with that? And it was another one where like, we had to do a little bit, like change light fixtures, paint it. Like anybody who's in like the remodeling world will be like, that's about as light as a touch up as you could do. But yeah, so like that was the first one. You felt like it was getting a little bit like, whoa, like we're actually like, we're going to own 4 properties now.
Yes, because we still self-manage ours, but at this time we didn't have any help, right? So it was just us. We're self-managing these and self-funding them. And that was a lot at that time.
Yeah.
I just remember like, it did make me super uncomfortable, but I mean, obviously I always trust in you, and you have it usually works out. So yeah, it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll try it. What's the worst thing we can do is sell it, right? We could always sell it. And if that's the worst thing, that's not the worst thing.
So that was the Parkwood property and Surprise about. Let's say like, okay, so that was like one of the first ones. I remember you saying like the Parkwood one was the first one, because that would have been our 4th one. That was the first one where you started to feel like, whoa, like this is a little bit interesting, right? But with that being said, like that's kind of emotional. Like logically, like had anything happened with the condo that we had and the other house in Surprise? Like nothing had happened in those 3 years. That was like we didn't even have a hiccup, I don't think, in anything.
No, we really didn't. I don't even think we had any problem. I mean, just recently we've started having just a couple maintenance things come up, but I feel like at that time it was just pretty much like you move them in, and then we didn't really hear from them until it was time to renew the lease. So nothing really happened. I think for me, it was just more of a, just taking that chunk of money and throwing it at something that, was going to give us a return, but, maybe not the one I had in my mind. I don't know.
Yeah. I think my opinion on it from like seeing it all happen is I think it was finally getting to that. Like, I feel like this was it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like we were finally getting into that, like rare space. Like everybody probably knows somebody like, oh, they have a rental property, right?
Mhm.
And then, maybe like a small, you're like, oh, like I know that person, they have 2 rental properties. But
Mhm.
like we were finally starting to get like, okay, we're going to own 4 properties. I think like that's actually rare space when you think of like statistically, probably people in the US and like owning properties. Like when you got to 4, like that's actually rare space. Like like we probably couldn't go meet a lot of people and be like, hey, like let's talk about like the challenges of owning 4 properties. So I feel it was like more of just like it wasn't normal ground. It wasn't like what
Yeah.
everybody was doing. Most people weren't like, oh, I'm like taking my money and collecting houses. So I think we were just doing something that you couldn't go back to your friends and talk too much about. And
Well, I mean, not even our friends, but even our family, it was hard to like find anyone who could like help, advise us and stuff. And I think that was just a little difficult too, because I kind of felt like we were on our own at that time. And I know that
yeah,
you had been listening to a few podcasts, and anyone who knows Chris knows he reads a million books a year. And so I feel like he had done a lot of research on it where I didn't really. And so he felt probably a lot more comfortable with the process because of all the research he did. And so I did not, though. There's not really, like you said, there wasn't a lot of people that we knew at the time that were doing that also, where we could talk with and kind of get feedback. And then, but I think after that one is when I was okay for a while, right? And then we moved into Oklahoma.
yeah. So that was, yeah. I mean, so the podcast she's talking about specifically is I started listening to Bigger Pockets podcast. If no one's listened to that, I think it's probably one of the coolest investing podcasts because you just hear so many people's journey. Like, and that's where I always say like my mentors are people like I don't even know. It sounds weird because I'll tell people something like, oh yeah, that guy's my mentor. That lady's my mentor. Like I've never met him, but I listen to their podcast and like I feel like that's a new world that we live in where like those people can be your mentors. So I remember people being on that podcast and they're like, I own 72 homes, like I own 62 homes. And so like I felt like I was like hanging around people virtually that own so much more than me. So like, yeah, even though like people like maybe in my friend or family network locally didn't have that, I felt like I was connected to this like virtual mastermind where I'm like, hey, like these people are playing much bigger than me. And like, they're talking so highly about it. And yet they have challenges, but they don't seem like anything I couldn't tackle. So I think like, you're right. Like I listened to a lot more podcasts and I was definitely, studying that subject a lot more at that time, that I felt like I was connected to people that were doing it at a much higher level, that I felt like having 4 was almost like, oh, like that seems like the bare minimum to the people I was listening to. So it seemed like so baby, if that's what I should say. So I felt like, okay, like I can solve this.
Yeah. And I think at that time it was really when we like, once we got the final renter in Parkwood, I feel like then it started to be like, hey, this is pretty cool. We have this passive income coming in every month that we don't really have to work for. And at that time, when we had these, I mean, a few years ago, that was probably equivalent with the price point that we were working at the time. I feel like that's probably equivalent to like half a deal coming through every month, just passively, which I think was really eye-opening. And then we started talking a little bit more like, hey, we'd love to do this. I don't know if Arizona is going to be the best place for us to do it with the amount of doors we want to have. And so I think that's when we really started thinking like, hey, we're not really smart at the stock market. We're not really smart at this, but like what we know is houses. And I feel like if we can work our portfolio up to get enough houses where we can retire off of that passive income, that would be really cool. So I think that's when we started looking for alternative options and kind of seeing like, okay, if we already are planning to spend this allocation of money, where can we get the most doors for our money?
Yeah. And I remember, so let's go into like, so we had 4 now in Arizona. Let's talk about like our Oklahoma journey. Cause
4
like
including our primary.
Yeah, of course. And so like that's probably like the most interesting journey is the Oklahoma. Cause I have probably more people ask about that. Cause not only do usually people have like multiple rental properties, they definitely don't go like out of state. So I've had that asked so many times, like what got you to Oklahoma? And like, specifically like a little city there, like an hour and a half from Dallas. And, so this came at 2, like this is a God thing. Like this came at like, there was 2 things going on in my life at the time and these all merged together. And that's why I always say it was a God thing is I remember I was looking at my spreadsheet and I was like, whoa, like prices had just started escalating in Arizona. So I was like, these houses that we were buying for, like the ones in Surprise were like, 160 to 210. And I was like, okay, they started getting up to like 280 and 290. I'm like, okay, 25% down on these now is a little bit more than it used to be. And I was thinking like, hey, if I had X amount of dollars to invest, how could this go further? Like, how could I get more doors with this money? And so I was like, I wonder, like, I hear these people on the podcast, Bigger Pockets. I was like, I hear them and they're buying in these other states. Like they're still buying in areas that like are 150 to 200, 250, and they're brand new houses. And so that was going through my mind. I was like, where could I go? And then it's so interesting how this stuff works. And it was at that same time that I was like, I'm gonna have to find like a cheaper state. And then I started, like, I was getting older. So I was getting like 36. I think at that age, like, you start thinking a little bit more long term. Me, I feel like I'm always thinking way longer term than I probably should be. I actually probably would enjoy the moment more if I stopped thinking so long term. But I remember sitting there, I was like, wait, like my parents had moved to Oklahoma because I'm Native American. And I was thinking, I was like, whoa, like I remember if you have my mom had told me, like, hey, if you have a primary house in certain areas in Oklahoma, if you live in a house for 6 months out of the year in a certain part of Oklahoma, you can get free medical like anywhere in the country. So here I get certain things in Arizona, like I have to go to a specific spot. But like it was there, like, hey, like if you ever had like cancer or something that like the Native American hospital couldn't solve, they could like write you a referral, like the Dallas hospital, and they would totally pick up the tab. So then I was like, like I was almost looking at things like I'm getting older. I maybe need like an insurance policy. And so I was like, I wonder what it would cost to buy a house in that area in Oklahoma. Like we knew rental properties. I'm like, what if I bought a house now at today's prices? And let's say I'm like 70, 80 one day and I'm like, I need medical attention. I could just get the renter out, when the lease is up, move into that place. And then I could just get free medical for the rest of my life. So it was like, okay, like I could buy one of these things. And it was more of a like insurance policy wrapped around like a rental property. And that was kind of the financial vehicle I was thinking.
Yeah. And I think what was also important is we were looking for an area specifically that did not experience significant like increases or decreases, right, with any given market. So we kind of looked back into like the 2007, 2008, 2009. We didn't really want to go into an area that had like severe, drastic lows or anything like that. And that's kind of another reason that pointed us to Durant, because remember your mom was helping do some research at that time as well. And she was like, these look to be pretty stable. So I think that was another reason why we started heading out there too.
Yeah. So it all merged at the same time. So like, as I say this, like this could have been a 6-month period. Now looking back, it felt like it merged at the same exact time. It probably didn't. But I remember looking at my spreadsheet at night and be like, hey, I've got to find, like, I always wanted newer properties. Like, like here in Arizona, I wanted properties that were like 10, 15 years old. Out of state, I was like, I even wanted newer because I didn't want to deal with the complexities of repairs and having like handyman in areas that I didn't know. So like I was looking at it from that avenue. Like I need to find a place where I can get cheaper houses that are newer. And then at that same era of life, it was like, I need I need insurance policy wrapped around a house. And then I remember where we live in North Peoria in Arizona, I remember being in a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot and I was on Zillow. And I remember putting in the city Durant, Oklahoma. That's one of the cities where I could buy and get free medical. And I remember putting in Durant, Oklahoma, and I found like these two houses next to each other. I think it said like, if you buy this house, you get the other house free. Like it was literally like a combo. And I remember I found some realtors on Zillow and I called this one realtor and I messaged them. They didn't answer. Well, I called this other one and I was in the Dunkin' Donut parking lot. And I remember talking to Ashley. That's our realtor in Oklahoma. And I was telling her about like, hey, this is property. I want to come see it. She looked it up. She's like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. And she's like, I don't know. And then she's like, what are your goals? I told her my goals. I was like, hey, I want them to be like 3 to 4 years, like new. I want them to like, I don't want to be more than 3 or 4 years old just because I don't know the logistics there. I don't have vendors. I want them to be fairly new. I need them to be like under 220,000. And like, do you know of anything? And she's like, well, when you come up here, let's look at things. And I think I actually booked a ticket and was there within like a few days. I don't know if that's like accurate, but that's what it felt like.
Yeah, I feel like that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, but that's like my MO. Like I'm the dude who's like, I get something in me.
You have no chill.
Yeah, say it again.
You have no chill.
Yeah, that would be right. Like no chill. Like when I'm on something, even if it doesn't work out, I'm focused on that for a week or two. I'm all in on that subject and I'm getting all the research done, all the data in front of me. And within 2 weeks, I'm either going to be all in or all out. And that's how quickly it's going to happen. And so, yeah, I remember flying up to Oklahoma and I met the realtor there. We looked at a few spots and I ended up buying 2. And
she was right. She was right. We did not want.
Yeah.
I want to get one.
Yeah. She's like, do you even want to go look at it? I was like, no, like she had told me enough. Well, interestingly enough, like she lived in this neighborhood, it's a newer neighborhood where they're still building. And she was like, we looked at a neighborhood and we bought one there. And we bought one there. And then we bought one like 3 hours away by Oklahoma City, just because I didn't know at the time. I was like, I'm going to buy one in this little city where I could get free medical, right? And then I'm going to buy one closer to Oklahoma City because I just wanted something closer to the city. Because I'm like, I don't know if like the equity will go up better. It was kind of sampling at the same time. I was like, I'm going to buy two and sample this out. And what was the hardest thing to do is because in this little town, they don't have a lot of rental comps. So like I couldn't figure out what we were going to rent these things for. Like I would be like, hey, what will this rent for? And she's like, oh, well, we rent most of our stuff on a Facebook group. We really don't use the MLS for rental.
And it's usually $1 a square foot is what they said.
Yeah. And she's like, it's usually $1 a square foot. So the only data I could go off was the neighborhood she lived in was a newer neighborhood, and you could buy them for like 180 to 220 at the time. And she said, I have 4 rentals on the street. And I said, what do you get? She's like, I get like $1,450 and I pay for their yard. I'm like, I wonder if I could get like $1,550, $1,600 and not pay to do their yard. And she's like, I don't know. So I used her numbers. I'm like, okay, she has 4 in that neighborhood. I know I can get that. The numbers penciled out with her numbers. And so I remember buying that place, buying the property in like by Oklahoma City called Edmond. And like, I remember putting it on for like $1,550 and we got it. Like, it's like instantly. It was the first place I found out. I was like, whoa, like these rent out really quickly in this little tiny town. And from there, I think I rented. She's like, I don't know how you got that much for rent. And I was like, well, first I asked, and then I didn't pay for their landscaping. So she's like, you're even on board. I'm like, yeah, like you got to try.
Well, I think what's interesting about that though, is I think with that town, when we started to meet people in there, like everybody has rental properties, like everyone has like a business, like, and everyone has rental properties. We're like, what is going on here? Like our realtor had several. Like our plumber had like 60 of them. And like, it was just like all these people that we kept meeting were like, this is crazy. Like, this is cool. Like why?
The painter like surprised me. The guy who ended up painting one of our houses, I was talking to him. He's like, I'm the pastor of the church. I own a car lot dealership. I own this painting service and I own 62.
He owned like a donut shop or something.
He's like, I own 62 homes. I was like, wait, what? And he's like, he said it so casual. I'm like, wait, you're the pastor of the church. You own a car dealership. Like you're on a paint company. That's what I hired you for. And you have 62 rentals. And he's like, yeah. And I was like,
I like this town.
Yeah. I was like, I need to meet more people here. But what was interesting about that era was, okay, so I have people who are like, how did you just so comfortably buy out of state? And I think when people think of buying out of state, like all they're really telling me is like, they don't maybe have a network. Because like, I don't know how many people I've helped buy in Arizona investment properties that live in Arizona and they don't have a network. Like I remember, I won't say the name, but I remember helping a client probably like 4 months ago buy an investment property. And like, they didn't want to, like they live like 45 minutes from where I was helping them buy. And they're like, I don't know, like that seems too far. And I tried to explain to them like many of my homes are in another state. And they're like, I know, but that just seems like too far. And then I asked them one day, I was like, what are you going to do? Drive by and look at it every Sunday? And I think just like asking them that question made them realize they're like, wait, like what are we going to do with this? Like, why do we need to be so close to the vicinity of where we live? And I said, like, are you going to drive by it and look at it every weekend? She's like, no. And I'm like, okay, like, do you think you need it to be close by because like you need to check on it? And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, it's kind of hard to check on these things after you have a tenant in them. And then the next one was like, do you think you need to be close by so you can fix things? She's like, I don't know. Yeah. Like my husband might want to fix some things here and there. I was like, maybe that's where it stopped right there. Cause I'm like, I couldn't fix anything.
Makes sense. But I think also
fix anything in a house if I tried. So like, no matter, like it could be my neighbor, like it could literally be in my own house I live in right now. And I couldn't fix whatever the problem. So like, I just never came from that, like, oh, I need to be close by to fix it. Cause I'm like, I already know I can't fix it. Therefore being closer isn't going to make me more confident of fixing it.
Yeah. But I would also say like, I would try not to fix things on your own, right? Like definitely hire a professional. I just think that you're not setting up necessarily always a good relationship if like you're the one in there fixing. I feel like number one, they start to call you more often. And I know that just because of other people that we talk to that do their own rental fixes. And I think not only that, but I think it kind of needs to establish a little bit of boundary between you and the tenant. Like we love our tenants and like usually we have like a moving gift for them and things like that. But I think like you need to establish a little bit of like professional boundaries with that and let like the maintenance happen from someone else who's probably a professional, because honestly, like this is an asset of yours. Like you need to make sure it's maintained properly.
Yeah. So I thought of like, I was like, hey, why is investing in Arizona so simple for me? And I was like, okay, because I know the AC guy, the plumber, the electrician, the handyman. Like I knew most of the vendors. So I'm like, hey, if something goes wrong, it's an easy connect, right? Like,
Mhm.
for example, when I remember the hot water heater went out in our surprise house and they called me, like, I remember them calling me like, hey, the hot water heater's not working. Like, I didn't need to go see it.
Mhm.
I mean, and I'm only like 20 minutes away. Like, I didn't even go see it. I called my plumber. I was like, hey, Tuttle, like, can you go by and check it? And I know I trust him. I was like, can you go check it? And if it's working, like, if it's not working, can you fix it and charge me for the repair? If
Mhm.
you just like look at it and it starts working, just charge me for the trip charge. And
Mhm.
if it's not working, will you go buy me another one and install it and charge me? And I remember he went there and he's like, hey, Bowers, this isn't working. I'm going to
Mhm.
go get another one. He's like, do you care? Like, if it's this model or this model? I was like, hey, Total, just pick the best one and put it in. And so it just shows you, I'm like, that was a $950 repair. But so many people think like, oh, well, I need to go see it. And I'm like, well, no, because like, what would I do? Go look at it and tell them what? Like, I still would look at that and be like, I don't know what's wrong with it. So I'm like, I call my plumber, they assess the situation.
Mhm.
And even if he had looked at it and been like, oh my God, it's working now, like I'd have been like, okay, just charge me $65 for going. And so it just shows you like what I did though in Oklahoma is I thought, let's get ahead of the problem because when somebody calls you and says their AC's out, bad time to start trying to build your network. So I remember going on
Mhm.
Facebook and there was this group. It was pretty much a group where they list all their rental properties. And like that's how that community like rents most of their stuff out is on a Facebook group. And so I was like, hey, I'm gonna go on here and like find like there was certain people in the group that kept renting out places. And I'm like, well, it looks like this person owns multiple things. And I
Mhm.
I linked up with like 5 or 6 people and I was like, hey, it looks like you own a few things. And they would be like, oh yeah, like I own this many and this person's like I own this many. And I'd be like, hey, like who's a good handyman, who's a good painter, who's a good plumber? And I
Mhm.
just kept like on a spreadsheet, kept documenting what they said. I'm like, hey, like like there's my first group of people. Now, can it get better over time? Sure. But like that's my first, like if these people live in this town, invest in this town and use these people, they're probably using like what I would think would be the better people. So that's how I built my first like network there. And then when we had our first any problems there, like we just started with that list.
Yeah, and I think that going on Facebook groups is such a great way. I mean, I belong to a Facebook group for our neighborhood that we live in, and I'm sure so many other people do the same. I know there's next door apps, there's all sorts of stuff where you can actually get really good referrals. And my advice to anyone going through it, just from like us having to do some similar stuff, and it would just be to get several, right? Just get a couple lined up because even if they're the best in that town, if you need someone ASAP, like you might need to use a different company. So always have it probably a lot, like 2 or 3, and just ask those people for other referrals. Like, so if it's a plumber, they're probably not going to give you the name of another plumber, but they'll give you the name of an electrician, or they'll give you a name of someone else that they've worked with. So I think that's important to just like kind of get your basics down. You need an electrician, a plumber, a handyman, a painter. That's typically, and I guess in Oklahoma, we need also someone who does yard maintenance too, just because it's extensive mowing out there.
Yeah. And so it was at that time, I think so. We had now like 5 or 6, I would say. We had, 3 or 4 here in Arizona. We had 2 there now. So like this was the era where I was like, property management, like we always just did it through a spreadsheet. Like we just did it ourselves. It seemed simple, right? It actually was very simple. Then we got to like 6 or 7 and we got to out of state. And then that's when we passed that over. And whether good or bad, this is how we did it. And we've kind of internally always just kind of tried to solve our own problems. And that's when our transaction coordinator for our real estate company that we have, we were like, hey, like, let's have you do this. And like, that's actually not what she really signed up for, I don't think, when she started. But I was like, hey, like, let's pass
No.
this. Yeah, let's pass this over to you. Like, let me just, and I remember her coming over to our house and our transaction coordinator is Brittany's mom, but like she came over to
Mhm.
our house, sat at our kitchen table. And I remember for like 4 hours, like, hey, here's all the systems I use. Like when they want to fill out applications, it's this link. When we want to run their background checks, it's this link. This is how we do it. Here's my spreadsheets. This is what we're going to do. And she like took on like 7 properties. And then that was to me, like, I was like, it was game on. And then this is where like the coolest part of our story was the next 2 years. Cause it went from like 7 to 20. And
Yeah.
it just like this one, I'm actually, when you say you were kind of uncomfortable, Britt, or a little like hesitant on that like third or fourth one, this is the
Mhm.
run where I'm like, whoa, I think this would have like really worried some people just with how fast it started going from there. Not only how fast, but like the most of them being out of state. And so, yeah, like that just,
Well, I think part of it was I wouldn't really know we were going under contract until I got the contract to sign. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess we're getting another one. And you're like, oh yeah, this one came up, so we're gonna put an offer on this one. So
right. And that's where I'm still like, this is a God thing. So I'm like, just meeting our realtor there and just,
mhm.
she would just call me and be like, hey, I got this listing coming up and this is what they need. Is this what you can give them? And I'd be like, yeah. And like, this was the era where like in Arizona, everything was selling for like 50, 60, 100,000 over list. And Oklahoma, it was like selling for like 5 and 10,000 over.
Mhm.
And I just was that
But I think
connect.
she offered them a good service because I'm sure
Yeah.
you're going to go into that. But like, I mean, she was like, hey, if you want to sell this today, I know somebody, they'll buy it.
Well, and I would solve their problem because a lot of them were like, hey, I need to like live here for another 2 or 3 months, but I want to sell it now, whatever the situation was. And I'd be like, cool. I didn't even look at a lot of the details. I just be like, hey, let them stay there for 3 months, like free. I don't care. Like I'll pay them 5 over,
Mhm.
like whatever you got to do to get me the deal. Cause it was a super competitive market there, like just as
Yeah.
competitive. It wasn't any big market. Um, and I remember I mean, we went from 7 to 20, like stat, like in 2 years. And that was like the coolest journey. And that was just like a mix of a lot of things combining, like just making really good income at our company,
Mhm.
selling homes for people. Like we do well at that. And we were making really good income. And it was not only that, but it was also like, it was just so easy. It was like my realtor would just call me. I think I would like to do like the real numbers on this because I've said it so many times where I'm like, I actually want to factually get this, but I'm going to tell you
Mhm.
what I think it is. I hope that I'm being, accurate. Is I think it was like we bought a house like every 6 weeks for like a year and a half or two.
I
Does
mean,
that math add up or no? Like it was,
I don't know, but I mean,
I mean,
it
we bought like,
could.
yeah, I was like, I remember for like a year, maybe it was like a year and a half, we bought like 15 of them. It's like, it felt like it was like we almost at every moment had something pending. So it was like a year and a half, like where we always had something under contract that we were buying. And that was the era where, yeah, like these were going for, when we first started buying there, they were like 180, then they got to 200,
Mhm.
then it was 240. We ended up there. Like, I think our highest when we bought was like 250. So we were putting down like 35, 40, 50,000 down on these. And like it was every 4 and 5 weeks, we were buying another one. And that to me, I still look back on that era and I smile because I'm like, man, like I remember like coming home from selling houses and meeting clients, and I'd be up at night. It was almost like a side job. And I'm like, I got to run the numbers on this, like figure out if we
Yeah.
want to buy this one. And that was just like so surreal. And it was fun. It was exhausting. And I remember like, I think like I'm being like super transparent. Like I think there was some times I looked at you and I was like, I think sometimes like I actually cried. Like
Mhm.
I remember like there was a few nights where I cried and it wasn't out of like the finances so much, but like it was just like moving so quickly. The pressure was just like, whoa. And I'm being serious when I say it, like I was almost like having an out of body experience. Like it almost felt like, whoa, like, are you buying another one? Are you buying another one? Like you got to think like getting loans on 16 homes over 2 years. Like you literally are always talking to a lender, always talking to an inspector, always
Well, I
looking at.
remember I put you in timeout from buying for like, I feel like a month or two because I was like, you cannot do this. I was like, you were too stressed out and it's stressing me out. And I was like, we have a company to run. But I mean, then, 24 hours later, you were fine. But I think it does get stressful. To be super transparent, like there are times where we were like very cash poor because we had like 2 or 3 closings going on, like for the Durant homes, right? And like it was like, okay, you have to funnel this money in. And we're like, oh my gosh, okay, well, then we've got these deals closing on our company side. So that's good. But also for like a few days, it was like, oh, this is stressful. But I think like we did want to go really hard, really fast because number one, that's the only speed Chris has. That he doesn't have a slowdown. Let's do this over 5 years. And also there was a couple other like levers that we were kind of seeing change that we were like, we should probably move on this faster.
Like the
One being
economy falling
interest,
apart. Yeah.
yeah, one being
So
interest rates.
COVID happened and I was like, I remember telling like, that's why I'm saying like there was times where like I cried because I was like it kind of felt emotionally like it hurt. And I was like, I had to work during the day and then I had to buy these at night. And like no one's gonna cry for me. Like great problems to have, but I'm still like, no matter how cool of a problem it was, like I'm just it still hurt some nights. And I was like, I remember telling Britt certain nights, I'd be like, my 65-year-old self is going to be so proud of myself. And that's all I could remember sometimes sitting there at the kitchen island and thinking like,
Mhm.
man, this is all moving so quickly. And like, it'd be easier just to chill and watch Netflix. But I always would go back to, I'm like, I think that like my 65 and 70-year-old self, like it's going to look back on that 2 and 3 years and just smile and be like, hey, like you did what you needed to do for your family. Like you did
Mhm.
what you needed. And no, even though it was hard, like you just didn't you didn't give in and you kept going and you knew you had to go to work and sell homes and you had to get to appointments and you had to figure out stuff with the underwriters and look at the inspection reports and deal with appraisals, talk to your realtor. Sometimes I flew up there once or twice just to like do some things. And so, yeah, like I don't know, to my own horn, but like I still would always come back to like, no matter how hard it was, I'd say like, I'm super proud of like, I would just always say like, you're going to be proud of yourself. And am I proud of myself yet? No, but like, I still really fully agree that like when I get to like a time where I really need the money more, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I was the error. Like we went in hard because like a lot of our interest rates at the time were like like investor rates were like 3.625, 4%. Like that's so low for an investor rate. And I knew when COVID happened, I just knew a few things were going to happen when they started printing off money and giving it to people. Like no matter which way you want to go on this, like I'm just going like, I knew when they were printing off money and giving it to people that the dollar was going to go down. I told Britt, like, I feel like inflation is going to happen heavy over the next few years. I feel like we're going to look back in 30 years and be like, how the heck did we ever get a 3.625 investor rate? Like they're almost incentivizing investors so much to go buy properties. Like I just knew there was a season that, and it might not be forever. I knew like that 2 and 3 years, like we might not buy rental properties our whole entire life, but like that was the season where I was like, we're going to cash in on that. Low interest rates, inflation happening. We're going to buy these and these properties are going to do well for us. And they have. So,
yeah, I think so too. And I think that's been a learning curve. And it's funny now, like going to some of like, masterminds with other agents who like also own properties and, and they're like, oh, you should have done it this way. And we're like, oh, we didn't know, you know what I mean? Like we didn't know any better at that time. And yeah, maybe that would have worked, and I'm sure it does because I'm sure it works for a lot of people. That wasn't our journey. And I think the important thing to take away from it is this is ours. It doesn't have to be yours, but I think that everyone has like a way in where they can do this on some level. And I think that the rewards are really good. And I think, like you said, Chris, like we're going to look back in 20, 30, 40 years and be like, wow, I'm glad we did that. Now we have this passive income that comes in and we don't have to stress about it. Right. A maintenance request will come up here and there. But I think at the end of the day, like we're going to be really happy that we have this revenue stream. And it'll allow us to do different things, with
well, it was like I told you when we were in Dallas recently, it was the first time where I remember looking at a spreadsheet, like at the desk in our hotel. Like I had to do some work and I pulled up the spreadsheet because we were looking at buying another property. And so I had to run some numbers on some stuff and I pulled up that spreadsheet and I like looked at it quickly. And then I went over to like our bills spreadsheet. We don't like have very minimal bills, but I remember like looking at that and I told you the next day and I remember sitting at, like we were eating at that restaurant. And I remember telling you like, and I like, once again, I kind of teared up as I was telling you, I remember like the feeling and like tearing up a little bit. And I remember I was saying like, man, I remember like I was telling you, I was like, man, we actually like, we could retire right now. And like, it was so weird for me to even say it. Cause I'd been grinding for 17 years. And it was just like the first time where I was like, I felt like I was like, this is like, this is what I've been trying to do. Like it was the first time, like I'd always kept track of spreadsheets and how much money I was making and what I was investing in. And it was the first time where I was like, well, like we have more money coming in passively off these rental properties than we have like going out on any bills. And thankfully I haven't signed up for a lot of bills in our life, but like, I was like, it just felt so weird. And like, not that we could live the lifestyle maybe that we're living now, like still working and making a really good income, but like, it was just nice to know where I was like, whoa, like we could like quit working and be okay. Yeah. I like that. Like, so like, I want to say like, I don't want anybody to think like I'm bragging. I want to go back to like how the listener like can take advantage of the story. And like, I just, at the end of the day, like, I just knew I was like, this is more of an investing conversation. Your outlet you want to invest in is up to you. But I think like if anybody could dial this down, like let's say someone's like, hey, Chris, I don't ever want to own a rental property, or I'm never going to invest in whatever. Like I think the point is that you've got to figure out how to make money, right? And you've got to figure out how to like, you can't just live off the money coming in. Like you have to figure out how to park a certain amount. Like, and someone could say like, well, Chris, I only make enough to pay my bills. And I'm like, oh, well, there's two things there. Like get less bills, like stop signing up for stuff, like get less bills or make more money. And like, those are the only levers you can go in this. Like I have many people that are like, I just make enough for my bills. And I'm like, all right, well, like make more, like there's more that can be made. And there's some people out there, like they have excess money, like they have more that comes through than their bills, but they're just spending it on stuff that means nothing. Like they buy the bigger car, they buy the bigger house. And it's like, really, like, is your 50 and 60-year-old self going to be like super stoked that you got into all this debt? Or is like your 50 or 60-year-old self going to be like, oh, I wish I had to save like $30 or $40 out of every $100 that I made so I can invest it in something. So like, this isn't a like conversation about you investing in houses. It's just like, hey, take a certain amount of money that you have and like decide to park it somewhere. I mean, the bank at the worst case scenario, park it there. Like I have a lot of stories on that, but like at least park it there and don't touch it. And it's not going to grow very fast, but like at least do that.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm like totally choking over
Yeah,
here.
you're choking over there, huh?
I'm sorry. No, but
So yeah, so that's kind of our investing journey. I just wanted to bring that up because like I said, we get a lot of people that ask, and I mean, sounds kind of cool. There was a lot of, stresses that went along with it. There was, a lot of work that was in place to get there. And also another thing that I'd like to note is like where we're the student again. Like we went on a run now where like the things that we were doing, we can't do anymore. And so like we were getting loans on properties, and I don't know if anybody knows, but like, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, whatever, they'll give 10 loans to one person, 10 loans to the other person. So like Britt has 10 loans, I have 10 loans. So we've like maximized what we can do through what they would call conforming loans or like conventional financing. We did all we could do there. So like what got us to here, like won't get us to the next stage. Like we're a student. So if you're listening to this and you don't have any rentals and you want them, you're a student. Like now we have 20 properties and we're a student again. Like I actually legitimately don't know how to get us to the next level. I tell Britt all the time, hey, we're going to have 40 homes. And I sit back and I'm like, I actually don't know how to do that. But so now I'm listening to more podcasts. I'm interviewing people. I'm calling people. I just met with someone today who has more homes in their like home loans in their name. Just trying to like now go back to like, hey, you've got to go seek this knowledge. Like nobody's just going to come to you and like give these to you. Like you got to figure out like what did someone else learn, and you got to go learn it, and you got to learn it, and then you got to execute it.
Absolutely.
What do you got on the end of this, Britt? So we're going to end it up here. I don't want to bore people with our journey, but I think it's cool just because I don't think enough people hear people's stories. And I listen to podcasts all the time of how people got like physically fit or got muscles or how they saved, millions of dollars. And I just like always love to hear, because we see so much anymore. Like you just see someone like where they're at. Like you see somebody and it's like, this is where they're at. And you think like, oh man, like they're lucky or like this and that. I'm like, I always like to hear those raw versions of like, how did they get here? And I think when people like see kind of the organic nature of how it goes from like A to Z, they realize like they can see a lot of them in the story. When they can see them and relate to them, they're like, okay, I think this is possible.
Yeah. I think if I'm going to just wrap it up with anything, it's just that we're nothing special, right?
Yeah.
We started with one house, right? A really small, little tiny house. And we just kind of built it from there. And I think the only difference is that we did have a mission in mind. And I knew we had goals and we worked really hard towards those goals. And we probably I don't want to say we went without, because we definitely did not go without. Like we have a great life. I'm super happy with our life. And yes, times were like for certain moments, but we have a great life. So we didn't go without, but we also went without what we could have had, right? For this ultimate goal. So I think that's, just something to be said, because I feel like everyone's at that level, right? They could always go without something to get something that's a little bit more important to them. So, but at the end of the day, like, I'm sorry, we're nothing special. Like we just had a goal in mind and we stuck to it.
Yeah. I mean, that's important to note. I think like I said, we'll end it with this, but I think that was probably the biggest challenge that I had over the few years was like the things that you had to sacrifice to get what you had. And when you say sacrifices, like I said, no one's going to cry for you, but it's like, it was all the cool things you could have bought with the money. It's like, oh, like you could have bought the dirt bike, or you could have bought the boat, or you could have bought the nicer car, or you could have bought this. Like you could have bought a nicer primary house. Like it was all the things that you could have bought that we were just willing to look at each other and be like, hey, like we could buy that, but like, I always will say, and I still say this today, is like, is my 70-year-old self going to be proud that I did this?
Yeah. And shame on anyone who does that. Like
this is our story.
This is our story. This is like what we wanted to work for. But I think that it's totally doable for so many people. Yeah. And I think that it's not anything that you need, a crazy excess amount of money in order to do. I think you can naturally, organically do it. And I think that, it's something that anyone can achieve.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're like one of our clients, we have some of our clients listen to our podcast, which is always cool. If if you're thinking about buying a rental property, just reach out to us. We'll definitely, tell you more like what actually like actionable items to do next, like get things going. You kind of heard our story and maybe bought into the philosophy of what we're doing. But if you're actually wanting to buy one, call us. We'll tell you like the exact steps you need to do to see if you can. And if you're a realtor, I would just recommend that just realize that what you're selling out there is actually a huge investment opportunity. So try to pick up some more of those. So that's where we'll leave this at. So thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope that we didn't bore you with our story. Our goal is just to let you know like the authentic version or the raw version of, how we got there. And we hope that you learned some things. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you guys.
All right, bye y'all.